The sun rose slowly over Baldwin Hills, a wealthy enclave tucked into the hills of South Los Angeles, where old money black elites lived behind trimmed hedges and iron gates. At the heart of this prestigious community stood the Lambert Estate, a 3-story stucco home with arched windows, imported Italian stone, and a driveway lined with crepe myrtle trees. Inside the house, Nia Wallace moved through the grand foyer with a cleaning caddy in one hand and a towel slung over her shoulder. She wore the Navy housekeeping uniform issued by her agency, but her posture, calm and poised, betrayed none of the exhaustion she carried from years of hard work. Her skin was the color of rich mahogany, smooth and radiant under the soft glow of the morning sun pouring through stained glass panels above the front door. Her short, natural curls were tucked into a neat cap, and her movements, precise, careful, almost ceremonial, gave her the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to move through the world without needing to be seen. Nia had been working in the Lambert house for 2 years, hired after the family's longtime housekeeper retired. She was known for keeping her head down, doing her job flawlessly, and never speaking more than was required. But inside there was more to her than anyone guessed. Far more. Out back, on the mansion's private terrace overlooking the hills, 16-year-old Chanel Lambert was throwing punches at a padded dummy, while her coach shouted instructions from the sidelines. She wore a custom-made GI stitched with her initials, and a black belt that had never once touched a public tournament, matte but had been earned through expensive private training. Her caramel curls were slicked back into a high ponytail, and her eyes hazel and sharp-narrowed every time her fist connected with synthetic leather. To her coach, she was a gifted student. To the neighbors, she was the Lambert heiress, destined for Ivy League schools and high society. But to anyone who had ever worked in the house, especially Nia, she was something else entirely. That morning, as Nia polished the wrought iron stair railing, she heard the sharp yells and the thud of kicks from the terrace and paused, not in fear but in awareness. Chanel wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. She didn't yell or threaten, but her superiority came like perfume, thick, expensive, and always in the air. And Nia had learned to recognize it the way others might sense a storm. It wasn't until late afternoon that the collision began. Nia was in the kitchen wiping down countertops when Dr. Gregory Lambert, the family patriarch, arrived home early from a medical conference in San Francisco. With him was his son Amir, just back from Morehouse, tall and thoughtful with soft eyes behind square frames. Amir didn't live in the house anymore, but whenever he returned, Nia noticed how the air shifted, how his presence seemed to quiet even the most performative spaces in the home. As he passed through the kitchen and nodded at her with a warm smile, she felt her stomach flutter. Not from attraction alone, but from recognition. Amir saw her, not as a uniform or a function, but as a person. She barely had time to return the smile before Chanel entered, sweaty from her session, but radiating the smug confidence of someone who believed the world was her stage. "Dad, Amir, don't let her fool you," she said loudly, motioning toward Nia with a glass of kombucha in her hand. "Did you know our housekeeper thinks she's a martial artist? I saw her watching my practice like she was studying me." Amir raised an eyebrow. "And?" he asked calmly. "And," Chanel continued, "she told Maureen she used to fight. Like real fight, jiu-jitsu. Isn't that adorable?" Her tone dripped with condescension. Nia didn't flinch. She dried her hands and turned slowly, her voice steady. "I said I trained, never claimed to be anything I'm not." "Trained where?" Chanel snorted. "In the backyard with your cousins?" "Girl, please." Before Nia could respond, Amir stepped forward. "Chanel, that's enough." But it wasn't. Not for Chanel. The next evening, during a dinner hosted by the family to celebrate Amir's return, Chanel made her move. She waited until the dessert plates were being cleared, and the guests, all alumni, politicians, and surgeons, were sipping espresso. Then she leaned forward, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We should do something fun," she said, locking eyes with Nia. "How about a little match, me and her, just for fun?" The room fell silent. Someone chuckled nervously. "You serious?" Amir asked, his voice tight. "Dead serious," Chanel smiled. "She's always watching me practice. Maybe it's time she learned what that belt actually means." Nia didn't move. Her pulse was steady. She looked around the table, then back at Chanel. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Be careful. You might learn something you didn't expect." A few people laughed, unsure if it was a joke or a warning. Chanel leaned back with a smirk. "Let's go. This Sunday." Backyard. Nia nodded once, then returned to the kitchen without another word. But inside, something had shifted. Not in fear, but in resolve. Sunday arrived with an eerie stillness over Baldwin Hills, the kind that made the birds quieter and the sky feel heavier than usual. The Lambert Mansion's expansive backyard had been transformed into a makeshift arena. A large white canopy shaded the guests, most of them well-dressed acquaintances of the Lambert family doctors. Attorneys, business owners, each holding a glass of champagne and murmuring curiously about the friendly spar they had been invited to witness. Underneath the polite laughter and clinking glasses was an undercurrent of voyeurism. They didn't come for sport. They came for spectacle. Amir sat near the edge of the crowd, his jaw tense, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the mat rolled out near the garden fountain. He hadn't spoken to Chanel since the challenge, and though he'd tried to reason with his father, Gregory Lambert had simply waved it off as youthful arrogance. Nia emerged from the side of the house quietly, wearing loose black pants and a fitted white t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She walked barefoot, carrying only a rolled towel, her expression unreadable. There were no embroidered GIs, no fanfare, no camera-ready poise. Just the quiet focus of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone but herself. Moments later, Chanel strutted out from the back doors in her white GI, golden initials glinting on her chest, her black belt tied with a dramatic flourish. Her coach trailed behind, smirking like a man confident in the outcome. Chanel waved to the crowd as if stepping into a fashion show. "Don't blink," she said aloud. "This'll be quick." Nia said nothing. She walked to the center of the mat and offered the traditional martial bow. Chanel mimicked it with exaggerated grace, then turned to the audience and mouthed, "Watch this." The bell sounded not official, just a ding from a service tray, and the two circled each other. Chanel came out fast, confident, aiming for a shoulder grab to initiate a throw. But Nia slipped under her grip with ease, pivoted on the balls of her feet, and shifted her weight. The move was subtle, almost invisible, but it knocked Chanel off rhythm. The crowd noticed. Chanel tried again, this time more aggressive, throwing. A flurry of arm movements. Nia blocked one, then another, then ducked low, swept Chanel's front leg, and pinned her with a reverse hold that had her face down in less than 8 seconds. The gasps from the crowd weren't loud, but they were sharp. Chanel struggled, tried to twist, but Nia's grip was surgical controlled, unshaking, perfectly placed. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, Nia released her hold before Chanel could tap out. She stood slowly and stepped back. "You wanted to teach me something," she said, voice level. "But it looks like I already knew it." Chanel jumped to her feet, furious, and lunged again without form, without thought-driven. By pride, not technique. This time Nia caught her arm mid-swing, stepped aside, and redirected her momentum until Chanel tumbled awkwardly to the grass beside the mat. The crowd gasped louder. It wasn't a brutal takedown, it was grace meeting aggression and choosing dignity. Chanel sat up slowly, her cheeks flushed with more than just embarrassment, but Nia didn't press further. She bowed once more, then turned and walked off the mat in silence. The audience sat frozen until a few tentative claps broke out, then more, until the backyard echoed with a hesitant standing ovation. Nia didn't stay for the congratulations. She disappeared into the house, head high, hands steady, leaving behind a scene no one would forget. Amir followed her minutes later, catching her just as she reached the side door. "That was the bravest thing I've seen in my life," he said quietly. "Not the fight, but walking away." Nia didn't smile. She only said, "Some things aren't worth holding down." But silence never wins anything. Meanwhile, in the crowd, Chanel stood frozen, staring at the mat like it had betrayed her. Her coach looked away. Her father sipped his drink and avoided eye contact. And from the shaded corner of the garden, a guest whispered, "I think we've been cheering for the wrong person all along." That night, the Lambert mansion felt quieter than usual, though no one acknowledged it aloud. The opulent dining room remained untouched, the planned celebratory dinner silently canceled by the weight of what had happened hours earlier. Upstairs, Chanel sat alone in her bedroom, still in her GI, staring at her reflection in the mirror with eyes that no longer carried confidence, only confusion. Her knuckles were scraped, her pride bruised, but what stung most was the look on the faces of the guests, some amused, others disappointed, none impressed. She threw her black belt onto the floor, the embroidered gold thread now a painful reminder of a title she no longer felt worthy of. Downstairs, Amir sat with his mother in the kitchen. Ms. Lambert stirred tea in slow, rhythmic circles, as if trying to find answers in the steam. "You know," she said gently, "strength is knowing when not to speak. But sometimes silence becomes complicity." Amir nodded. He had always seen Nia as more than her job, but today, the world had seen it too, and that changed everything. The next morning, Nia returned to her modest apartment in Inglewood. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but the space radiated peace. Her daughter, Jada, greeted her with a tight hug and 1,000 questions. "Did you win?" "I didn't go there to win," Nia replied. "I went there to be heard." That same day, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Johnson," the voice said. "This is Coach Raymond from South LA Youth Grapplers. We saw what you did yesterday. We were wondering if you'd be open to teaching a workshop. Our girls need to see someone like you." Nia paused, then smiled. "I'd love to." Word of the match spread beyond the local elite circles. A bystander's video clip, shaky but clear, was posted online. It showed Nia's quiet strength, her composure, her refusal to retaliate even when provoked. In less than 24 hours, the clip amassed thousands of views. Comments poured in from across the country, messages of admiration, apologies for ever doubting her, stories from others who'd been overlooked in spaces of privilege. "That woman didn't just win a match," someone tweeted. "She dismantled a whole narrative." Meanwhile, back at the Lambert estate, Gregory sat in his study, watching the same clip on his tablet. He didn't say a word, but the scotch in his hand trembled slightly. He had built his empire on power and image, but his daughter's downfall wasn't due to a moment of weakness. It was due to the strength of someone he'd never taken seriously. Later that evening, Chanel appeared downstairs, hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes red from crying but defiant nonetheless. "I want to talk to her," she told Amir. "I need to understand how I lost to someone no one even noticed." "That's the problem," he replied. "You never saw her. You only saw yourself." Chanel didn't respond. For once, she had no comeback. That week, Nia held her first workshop in a cramped rec center gym. 10 girls showed up. Then 20. By the third week, they had to move to a bigger space. She taught not just techniques but mindset. "Self-defense," she told them, "starts with knowing you matter even when no one claps." Parents began showing up too, mothers who had never thrown a punch, grandmothers who sat on benches with tears in their eyes. One day, Amir visited the class. He stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping in. When their eyes met, she smiled softly. "Didn't think I'd see you in a place like this," she said. "This is exactly the place I need to be," he answered. And in that gym, surrounded by peeling walls and mats that smelled like ambition, something real took root, not just admiration, but love built on equal ground. Months passed, and what began as a quiet workshop in a rec center bloomed into a full-fledged community program known as the Inner Belt. Nia didn't just teach martial arts, she taught presence, pride, and patience. With Amir's help, she secured grants, partnered with local schools, and expanded her classes into neighborhoods long ignored by city council budgets. The mats were worn, the air conditioning unreliable, but the spirit was unstoppable. Word continued to spread, and by the end of the year, Nia was invited to speak at a statewide youth empowerment conference in Sacramento. As she stepped onto the stage, wearing jeans and a black hoodie with "Rooted Strength" printed on the back, she looked out at a sea of young faces, many of them girls with braids, twists, and scars from battles they didn't ask for. "My name is Nia Johnson," she began, voice steady but rich with memory. "I was once invisible in rooms like this, until someone tried to humiliate me in front of people who thought I didn't belong. But instead of shrinking, I stood. Not to prove I was better, but to prove I was enough." The applause was thunderous, and in the back row, watching with quiet awe, stood Chanel. She wore a simple coat, no entourage, and her once arrogant posture was replaced with something new: humility. She waited until the crowd cleared, then approached slowly. Nia didn't flinch. "I owe you an apology," Chanel said. "Not just for the fight, for everything before it." Nia nodded, not with softness, but with understanding. "You weren't fighting me that day. You were fighting the version of yourself you were told mattered most. I just happened to be in the way." Chanel exhaled sharply, a sound between a laugh and a sob. "That day destroyed me, but it also freed me. I started over. I coach now low-income girls in East Point. I had to unlearn everything I thought made me strong." Nia offered her hand. Then maybe we were both meant to fall forward. They shook. That night, as Amir drove Nia back home, the radio played softly while the city lights rolled by like whispered memories. "Do you ever regret not walking away that day?" he asked, eyes flicking between the road and her reflection in the window. "No," she said, without hesitation. "Because that fight wasn't about me versus her. It was about silence versus voice. And I wasn't going to let silence win again." Back at home, Jada waited with her handmade sign, "Welcome home, champion," though her mother had never told her to make one. It was just who Jada was. Nia hugged her daughter tightly, feeling the past, present, and future all wrap into one moment of grace. On weekends, the dojo became more than a school. It became a family hub, a cultural center, a sanctuary. Mothers brought food, elders shared wisdom, and former students returned to teach the next generation. Amir, now fully invested, handled operations, fundraising, and sometimes even taught sparring drills. He and Nia never made a big announcement about their relationship. It simply existed, unshakable, visible in every shared glance, every quiet touch, every unified choice. Together, they showed that love was not about rescue, it was about recognition. As for Chanel, her redemption arc continued quietly. She no longer chased medals or followers. Instead, she showed up for her girls, taught them to fall and rise, and even brought them to visit the Inner Belt, where she introduced them to Nia with reverence, not rivalry. One day, Jada, now 10 and bold, asked her mother why she never framed any of her jiu-jitsu awards. "Because," Nia said, "the real medals are the people who walk out of here believing they matter." And in that humble dojo, beneath banners, hand-painted by kids and mats worn by effort, Nia's legacy grew, not as a maid who beat the boss's daughter, but as the woman who turned a fight into a future. As the sun dipped beneath the Atlanta skyline and bathed the Root Project's gym in a soft orange hue, the final echoes of the inauguration still lingered in the air: cheers, laughter, and whispered conversations about change, about history, being rewritten from the ground up. But for Kenya Johnson, the applause was never the destination. It was a pause, a breath, one she had earned after years of walking through doors that never seemed to open all the way. And while the community celebrated around her, Kenya stood by the back entrance alone for a moment, watching her daughter play on the mat with the other children, seeing a future she once believed unreachable unfold right before her eyes. Ethan came up behind her, holding 2 cups of water, and handed her one without a word. He didn't need to speak. His presence had become fluent in quiet affirmations. She took the water with a nod and leaned lightly against him, not romantically, but with the weight of someone finally allowed to rest against something solid. But stories like this don't end with a ribbon cutting or a kiss on a porch, they evolve. And in the weeks that followed, the Root Project grew from a local initiative into something larger than either of them had imagined. Calls came in from educators, nonprofits, even city council members. Could they help set up similar programs in other neighborhoods? Could they bring the philosophy behind the project of empowerment through discipline and healing through movement to schools, juvenile centers, shelters? Kenya, who had once been told she was just a maid, found herself sitting in city meetings, presenting the Root model as a replicable community program. She wore modest clothes, spoke calmly, and used her lived experience like a scalpel cutting through bureaucracy and formality with truth. And Ethan? He became her shield in the rooms she still didn't trust, her translator when the language of the elite threatened to drown out sincerity. Their bond deepened, not just as partners in cause, but in belief. They had seen each other's broken pieces and chosen to build something with them, instead of running from the weight. Meanwhile, Brooke, once the icy crown jewel of Atlanta's elite, had begun her own quiet transformation. She didn't tell anyone when she started volunteering at a local rec center. She didn't announce it when she stopped training competitively. But the walls of the mansion that once felt like armor had started to echo, haunted by her own silence. One evening, long after the guests and gossip had died down, she sat alone at the edge of her family's rooftop terrace, looking out over the manicured city blocks. Her phone lit up with a video Kenya awarding a belt to a teenage boy with cerebral palsy. Brooke watched, unmoving, as the boy smiled with a pride she hadn't felt in years. And then something cracked, not from pressure, but from finally letting go of the performance. She didn't need to win anymore. She needed to become someone who knew how to lose gracefully. That night, Brooke penned a handwritten letter to Kenya. She didn't mail it for weeks. But when she did, it read simply, "Thank you for beating me when I needed it most." Months passed, then a year. The Root Project expanded to 2 more centers, one in Savannah, the other in Birmingham. Kenya, now a public speaker and coach, continued to keep her mornings sacred. She woke before the sun, made her daughter's breakfast, and walked with her to school like she had nothing else on her schedule. Because at the root of it all, before the applause and awards and interviews, she was a mother who had once scrubbed marble floors to make sure her child ate. And she never forgot that. Ethan proposed not with a ring, but with a question. One evening on their porch, watching fireflies dance through the Georgia dusk, he took her hand and asked, "Can we keep building this for life?" Kenya didn't say yes right away. She looked at him, her eyes carrying the weight of every door that had ever been closed in her face. "Only," she said softly, "if we keep leaving the door open behind us." He smiled, knowing she meant if for the world, not just their home. They were married in a simple garden ceremony, with a guest list of students, neighbors, and old friends. No press, no pretense. Her daughter, now 11, read a poem she wrote herself. Brooke attended too quiet, observant, with a small bouquet of wildflowers and no need to be the center of anything. Years later, when the Root Project was honored by the National Council for Civic Innovation, the committee asked Kenya to speak. At their annual conference in Washington, D.C., She stood at a podium in front of lawmakers, educators, and activists. And though the crowd was full of polished professionals, it was her voice they waited for. "I was taught early," she began, "that some people are handed microphones, while others have to carve them from stone. I didn't come here to speak for the voiceless. I came to remind you they have voices. You've just stopped listening." The room erupted, not with polite applause, but with something more visceral, recognition. After the ceremony, a young black girl, maybe 16, approached Kenya with a nervous smile and tears in her eyes. "I thought I was crazy for noticing how different people treat me at school," she said. "But hearing you makes me feel like I'm not broken." Kenya hugged her tight and whispered, "You're not broken. You're the blueprint." Back home, the gym remained full. And so did Kenya's heart. Every time she taught a girl how to escape a chokehold, she remembered the first time someone told her she didn't belong. And every time that girl stood tall afterward, Kenya knew she was rewriting the story in real time. In the small upstairs office of the gym, there was a framed photograph, a snapshot of Kenya mid-laugh, a child clinging to her back, Ethan off to the side holding pads and grinning. Underneath the photo, a plaque read, "Respect is earned, not requested, and it begins with remembering you deserve it." The legacy of what started with a floor scrubbed in silence and a glance exchanged in a hallway now rippled across cities. But for Kenya and Ethan, it wasn't about legacy. It was about presence, about showing up, about rewriting what it meant to rise, not by stepping on others, but by lifting them. And as long as there were stories left untold, mats left empty, and voices still whispering in the corners of rooms too loud with privilege, they would be there, together, rooted, ready. And so, as dusk settled over the city and the familiar hum of Atlanta quieted into the gentle rustle of leaves, Kenya Johnson stood alone on the training mat, the last light of day spilling through the gym windows like gold spilled from the sky. Around her, the sounds of laughter, footsteps, and farewell hugs faded one by one as students, volunteers, and parents slowly filtered out into the evening. The floor beneath her bare feet was worn, scuffed, and marked with countless hours of struggle and growth, each scratch a testament to someone's journey, each spot a reminder of a time when pain was transformed into power. She stood still, her eyes closed, breathing in the silence not as emptiness, but as arrival. From a maid cleaning marble floors in a house that never saw her, to the founder of a movement that changed not just her own life, but the lives of dozens, then hundreds, she had walked a path carved through quiet dignity, resilience, and unshakable purpose. Her daughter's laughter echoed from the office upstairs free, unburdened, and it reminded Kenya what this all meant. Not glory, not revenge, but legacy. The kind that lives in confidence passed down in the gaze of a child who knows she belongs in every room, on every mat, at every table. Behind her, she felt Ethan's presence before she heard his steps. He came quietly, holding her favorite tea in a chipped white mug they'd found at a second-hand store the day they opened. The gym. No diamonds, no silk. Just memory and effort wrapped in comfort. "They're asking for you outside," he said softly. "The kids want to take a picture under the new banner." She turned, smiling. "Let them take one without me first. I want them to see that they own this place too." Ethan nodded, not needing to say anything else, and placed the mug on a bench beside her. They stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sky outside deepen from gold to indigo. A silence passed between them, familiar, warm, full. Kenya finally spoke, her voice low and sure. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I never looked up that day? If I just kept my eyes on the floor?" Ethan looked at her. "Steady. I think about it every day, and I thank God you did." Kenya exhaled, not with regret, but with recognition. It wasn't courage back then. It was survival. But maybe they're the same thing. She walked toward the far wall where a newly hung poster read, The Root Project, where strength begins and no one is invisible. Her fingers brushed the edge of it lightly, as if grounding herself. Then she turned back to Ethan, her eyes clear and fierce. "I'm not done," she said. "Not until every girl like me knows she never had to earn her worth in the first place." Ethan smiled, pride blooming across his face. "Then neither am I." Outside, the voices of the children swelled again, joyful, impatient, full of the kind of noise that only comes from safe spaces. Kenya stepped off the mat, her steps no longer quiet, no longer unsure. She didn't carry the weight of proving anything anymore. She carried purpose. She carried peace. She carried the fire of knowing she had transformed her pain into something sacred, something that would outlive every insult, every dismissal, every door that had once been slammed in her face. And as she pushed open the doors to the courtyard, where lights strung across wooden poles danced in the wind, and the people who now called her teacher, coach, founder, friend stood waiting, she stepped into the light not as someone who had fought to belong, but as someone who knew she always did. The cheers weren't loud for show, they were full and deep and real. The fight was over, but the movement had only just begun.